The forge glowed red-hot in the Nevada evening as Adelaide Johnson brought the hammer down one more time, the clang of metal on metal echoing through the dusty streets of Las Vegas, a small town that barely deserved its grand name in this year of 1871. She pushed her dark hair from her face with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of soot across her cheek, and examined the horseshoe she had been shaping for the past 20 minutes. Her father had taught her to see the imperfections, to feel them in the metal itself, and she could tell this one needed just a bit more work. Adelaide. Her father's voice called from the back room, weak and strained. Did Mr. Henderson come for his order yet? Not yet, Papa, she called back, setting the horseshoe aside and moving to the doorway. Thomas Johnson lay on a narrow cot, his leg wrapped in bandages from where a spooked horse had kicked him 3 weeks prior. The injury had become infected, and though the doctor had managed to save his life and his leg, he would not be working the forge for months to come. At 20 years old, Adelaide had never expected to become the town's blacksmith, but necessity cared nothing for expectations. She had learned the trade working alongside her father since she was 12, helping with the smaller tasks at first, then gradually taking on more complex work. Now, with her father bedridden, she was the only thing standing between their small business and complete ruin. "You working too hard, daughter," Thomas said, trying to shift himself upright. "You should not be out there in this heat doing a man's work." Adelaide smiled despite her exhaustion. "Papa, you know as well as I do that work has no gender. It just needs doing, and I am the one to do it." She moved to his bedside, helping him adjust his pillows. "Besides, my hands are strong. You made sure of that." Indeed, her hands bore the calluses and small scars of her trade. They were not the soft, delicate hands that society expected of a young woman, but she wore them with pride. Each callus represented a skill learned, a challenge overcome, a piece of work completed with her own 2 hands. The sound of hoofbeats outside drew her attention. She patted her father's shoulder and returned to the forge, stepping into the late afternoon sun to see who had arrived. A stranger sat atop a massive chestnut stallion, a man so large he made the already sizable horse look almost small. He had long dark hair that fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard that could not hide the strong line of his jaw. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms thick with muscle visible even through his buckskin shirt. Everything about him spoke of the wilderness, from his weathered skin to the way he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who lived more with nature than with civilization. "This the Johnson forge?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "It is," Adelaide said, wiping her hands on her leather apron. "How can I help you?" The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and Adelaide had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He stood well over 6 feet tall, perhaps 6.5, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her soot-stained face, her rolled-up sleeves, her stance at the forge. "Need some work done," he said. "My knife broke on the trail." "Need a new one, good and strong. Heard in town that Thomas Johnson was the best smith in 50 miles. "My father is recovering from an injury," Adelaide said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I am handling all the forge work at present. I can make you a knife that will serve you well." Something flickered in the man's dark eyes, surprise perhaps, or doubt. He reached into his pack and pulled out the broken pieces of his knife. The blade had snapped clean through, likely from being used for some task it was never meant to handle. Adelaide took the pieces, examining them with a practiced eye. "This is good steel," she said. "Shame to see it broken. What were you using it for?" A hint of what might have been amusement touched the corners of his mouth. prying open a rock slide to free my horse. Probably not what the smith who made it intended. Probably not, Adelaide agreed. I can forge you a new blade stronger than this one. Will take me 2 days, maybe 3. The steel needs to be heated and folded properly to get the strength you will need if you are going to keep using your knives as crowbars. Now he did almost smile, a slight lifting of one corner of his mouth. Fair enough. Name's Reginald Jameson. Most folks call me Red, on account of my hair used to be redder before the sun bleached it out. Adelaide Johnson. Most folks call me Adelaide, on account of that being my name. She said it without thinking, the kind of dry humor her father often employed, and was surprised when Red let out a short laugh, a sound like distant thunder. Pleased to meet you, Miss Johnson. What will you charge for the knife? They negotiated a fair price, and Adelaide promised to have the work done within 3 days. Red paid half up front, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he counted out the coins. As he prepared to mount his horse again, he paused, looking back at the forge. You really do all the work yourself? He asked. No helper, no apprentice, just me, Adelaide confirmed. My father taught me well, Mr. Jameson. You will have your knife, and it will be quality work. He studied her for another long moment, and she found herself wondering what he saw. Did he see a woman playing at a man's trade, or did he see a skilled worker who happened to be female? His next words surprised her. She's the blacksmith's girl with calloused palms, he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. She has the hands of strength. Before Adelaide could respond, he had mounted his horse and ridden off toward the edge of town, where she knew there was a small boarding house that sometimes took in travelers. She stood watching until he disappeared around a corner, then looked down at her own hands, rough and scarred and strong. The hands of strength. She had never thought of them that way before, but she found she liked it. The next morning, Adelaide rose before dawn as she always did. The desert air was cool in these early hours, and it was the best time to work the forge before the Nevada sun turned the world into an oven. She rekindled the fire, pumping the bellows until the coals glowed white-hot, and set to work on Red's knife. Forging a good blade was not quick work. The steel had to be heated and hammered, folded and heated again, each step building strength and flexibility into the metal. Adelaide lost herself in the rhythm of it, the way she always did. Hammer and anvil, fire and steel, these were the constants of her life, the things she understood better than anything else. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not notice Red's approach until his shadow fell across her workbench. She looked up to find him watching her, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Jameson, she said, setting down her hammer. I did not expect to see you until the knife was finished. Saw the smoke from the forge, he said. Figured you were an early riser. Wanted to ask if you might have time to shoe my horse. The boarding house owner said you do that work too. I do, Adelaide said. Bring him around and I will take a look. Red Stallion was a magnificent animal, clearly well cared for despite the hard life of the trail. Adelaide ran her hands down each leg, checking the current shoes, and found them worn dangerously thin on the front hooves. He needs new shoes all around, she said. These are about to give out completely. How long have you been riding him on these? Too long, Red admitted. Been hard to find a smith out in the mountains. I spend most of my time up in the high country, trapping and hunting. Do not come to towns much. You are a mountain man, then, Adelaide said, selecting the right size shoes from her stock. I have heard of such men but never met one. Not many of us left, Red said. The beaver trade is not what it used to be. Mostly I hunt for meat now, sell the pelts when I can. Live off the land. Adelaide began the process of preparing the horse's hooves, working with calm efficiency. The stallion, sensing her competence, stood quietly for her. As she worked, Red watched, leaning against the forge wall with his arms crossed over his broad chest. "How did you learn to do this?" he asked after a while. "Smithing, I mean. It is not the usual trade for a woman." Adelaide did not look up from her work. "My mother died when I was young. My father had no one else to teach, and I wanted to learn. He believed that skill mattered more than tradition." "Smart man," Red said. "I have known plenty of men who could not shoe a horse to save their lives, and here you are doing it like you were born to it." "Everyone is born to something," Adelaide said, moving to the next hoof. "The trick is figuring out what." They fell into a comfortable silence as Adelaide finished the shoeing. When she was done, Red walked his horse around the yard, testing the work. He nodded, satisfied. "Good work," he said. "Real good. What do I owe you?" Adelaide named her price, and Red paid without argument. As he prepared to leave again, he hesitated. "You eaten breakfast yet?" he asked. The question surprised Adelaide. "I have not. I usually work until mid-morning, then go see to my father." "There is a woman at the boarding house who makes biscuits and gravy that would make you weep," Red said. "If you are not opposed to the company, I would be pleased to buy you breakfast. Consider it a thank you for getting my horse sorted so quickly." Adelaide looked down at herself, at the soot and ash that covered her apron, her rolled sleeves, the dirt under her fingernails. "I am not fit for company, Mr. Jameson, Red," he corrected. "And you look just fine to me. Besides, you think a mountain man cares about a bit of honest dirt." Something about his directness appealed to her. Adelaide found herself nodding. "Let me just bank the forge and check on my father. Give me 10 minutes." She told her father where she was going, helped him with his morning medicine, and washed her face and hands in the basin by the door. She could not do much about her work clothes, but she removed her apron and smoothed her hair as best she could. When she emerged, Red was waiting with his horse, and they walked together toward the boarding house. The morning streets of Las Vegas were beginning to wake up. Shop owners swept their stoops, and early risers headed toward their various occupations. Adelaide noticed more than a few curious looks directed their way, the town blacksmith walking alongside a massive mountain man. Let them look, she thought. She had never much cared what people thought of her choices. The boarding house dining room was small but clean, and the woman who ran it, a widow named Martha Hayes, greeted them with a warm smile that only widened when she saw Red. "Mr. Jameson, back so soon, and with company." Her eyes sparkled with barely concealed curiosity as she looked at Adelaide. "Miss Johnson was kind enough to accept my invitation to breakfast," Red said. "We will have 2 of whatever you are serving this morning." They sat at a small table near the window, and Adelaide found herself studying Red more closely in the morning light. He had the weathered look of a man who lived outdoors, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. There were scars on his hands and forearms, the marks of a hard life, but he moved with a grace unusual in such a large man. "How long have you been a mountain man?" Adelaide asked as Martha brought them coffee, hot and strong. 10 years, give or take," Red said. "Came west when I was 18, looking for adventure and fortune. Found more of the first than the second, but I cannot complain. It is a good life, being up in the high country, peaceful." "Do you never get lonely?" Red considered this, wrapping his large hands around the coffee cup. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I have my horse and the land itself for company. The mountains talk if you know how to listen. Still, I will admit there are times I miss having someone to share it all with, someone to talk to who can actually talk back." Martha arrived with their breakfast, plates piled high with fluffy biscuits swimming in thick gravy, with strips of bacon on the side. Adelaide had not realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. She had been working so hard these past weeks that she often forgot to eat properly. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Adelaide found herself relaxing in Red's presence. He did not try to fill every moment with chatter, seemed comfortable with quiet, and she appreciated that. Too many people felt the need to talk constantly, as if silence were something to be feared. "What about you?" Red asked eventually. "You ever think about doing something besides smithing?" Adelaide shook her head. "I love the work, love seeing something take shape under my hands, love knowing that what I make serves a real purpose. A good horseshoe keeps a horse sound. A strong knife can save a life. That matters to me." "It should matter," Red said. "Too many people do work they do not care about just to get by. But you have passion for it. I can see it in the way you work. You were watching me work." Adelaide felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Hard not to," Red said, meeting her eyes directly. "You move like the work is a dance you have practiced 1,000 times. Every motion has purpose. It is something to see." Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge. "You are kind to say so." "Not being kind," Red said. "Just truthful. I have lived too long in the wild to bother with false flattery. Say what I mean what I say." They finished breakfast, and Red walked Adelaide back to the forge. When they arrived, he tied his horse to the rail outside and turned to her. "I need to head up into the hills today, check some traps I set before I came to town. But I will be back tomorrow evening to see how the knife is coming along, if that is acceptable." "The knife will not be ready until day after tomorrow at the earliest," Adelaide said. "I told you 3 days." "I know," Red said, and there was something in his eyes, something warm and open. "But I figure I might want to check on it, make sure it is coming along properly." Adelaide found herself smiling. "I suppose that would be acceptable for quality assurance." "Exactly," Red said, "quality assurance." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was almost courtly, mounted his horse, and rode out of town heading north toward the mountains. Adelaide watched him go, then turned back to her forge with a strange lightness in her chest. She had work to do, a knife to finish, a dozen other orders waiting. But as she pumped the bellows and the fire roared to life, she found herself looking forward to the next evening in a way she had not looked forward to anything in a long time. The day passed in the familiar rhythm of work. Adelaide finished shaping Red's knife blade, then set it aside to begin the slow process of tempering. She could not rush this part. The steel needed to cool and reheat multiple times to achieve the right balance of hardness and flexibility. While she waited between heating cycles, she worked on other projects, a set of hinges for the general store, repairs on a broken wagon wheel rim, the endless parade of horseshoes that kept her fed and housed. Her father was stronger when she checked on him at midday, able to sit up and eat the lunch she had brought from the boarding house. They talked about the business, about the orders that were coming in, and Adelaide carefully did not mention Red Jameson or the strange warmth she felt when she thought about him. The next day dragged. Adelaide told herself it was because she was tired, because the heat was oppressive, because her hands ached from 2 weeks of non-stop work. She told herself it had nothing to do with watching the sun creep across the sky, waiting for evening. But when she finally saw Red riding back into town as the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and gold, her heart kicked up in a way she could not deny. He dismounted and walked to the forge, and Adelaide held up the knife blade for his inspection. It was not yet complete, still needed a handle and final sharpening, but the blade itself was finished. "That is beautiful work," Red said, taking the blade carefully and examining it in the fading light. "Better than the one I had before." "It will be stronger too," Adelaide said. "I folded the steel more times than usual. It should hold up to whatever you throw at it. Red looked at her over the blade, his dark eyes serious. I believe it will. You do good work, Adelaide Johnson. The way he said her name, slow and deliberate, made something flutter in her stomach. Thank you, she managed. I brought you something, Red said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth and handed it to her. Saw these growing up in the hills and thought of you. Adelaide unwrapped the cloth to find a bouquet of wildflowers, desert lupines and Indian paintbrush, their colors still vibrant despite the journey down from the mountains. They were not roses or cultivated garden flowers, but something about their wild beauty touched her more deeply than any hothouse bloom could have. They are lovely, she said softly. Thank you. Figured you might not get flowers much doing the work you do, Red said. Seemed a shame. Woman should get flowers now and then. I have never received flowers before, Adelaide admitted. Never really expected to. Red's expression darkened slightly. That is a damn shame. Pardon my language, but it is. Adelaide laughed, surprising herself. I have worked in a forge since I was 12, Mr. Jameson. I have heard far worse language than that and used some of it myself when a piece refuses to cooperate. Red, he said again. Please. Mr. Jameson was my father and he was not a good man. I prefer Red. Red then, Adelaide said, liking the way the name felt in her mouth. Simple, honest, like the man himself. They stood there in the settling dusk, and Adelaide became aware of how close they were standing, how she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He smelled of pine trees and leather and the clean scent of mountain air, so different from the smoke and metal that permeated her own clothes. Would you let me take you to dinner? Red asked. A real dinner, not just breakfast. There is a restaurant on the other side of town that I hear serves good beef. I should not, Adelaide said, thinking of all the reasons she should say no. I have work to finish, and my father needs his evening medicine, and people will talk. Let them talk, Red said. But I understand about your father and the work. What if I came back in 2 hours? Would that give you time to finish what needs finishing? Adelaide knew she should still say no. She barely knew this man. He would be gone in a few days, back to his mountains, and she would be here with her forge and her father and her solitary life. But when she looked up into his weathered face, saw the genuine hope in his eyes, she found herself nodding. 2 hours, she agreed. I will meet you here. Red's face split into a genuine smile, transforming his rugged features into something almost boyish. 2 hours, he confirmed and swung back onto his horse. Adelaide rushed through the rest of her work, finished Red's knife by attaching a handle of polished oak and wrapping it with leather cord for grip. She checked on her father, gave him his medicine, and for the first time told him she was having dinner with someone. Thomas Johnson looked at his daughter with knowing eyes. This mountain man you have been doing work for. His name is Red Jameson, Adelaide said. And yes, he treating you respectful, very much so, Papa. Thomas nodded slowly. Then you go, have yourself a nice evening. Lord knows you have earned it, working as hard as you have been. Just be smart about it. I will, Adelaide promised and kissed his forehead. She washed thoroughly, changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and brushed her dark hair until it shone. She could not do much about the calluses on her hands or the small burns that dotted her forearms, but when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she thought she looked presentable. Red was waiting outside the forge when she emerged, and the look on his face when he saw her made every moment of preparation worthwhile. He had cleaned up too, she noticed, wearing a fresh shirt and with his long hair neatly combed. You look beautiful, he said simply, and offered her his arm. They walked through the evening streets to the restaurant, a small establishment run by a family from back east. The food was simple but good, thick steaks and potatoes, fresh bread with butter. They talked as they ate, really talked, sharing pieces of their lives. Red told her about growing up in Missouri, about an abusive father and a mother who died too young. He told her about heading west as soon as he was old enough, about learning to survive in the mountains, about the breathtaking beauty of the high country and the harsh realities of living close to nature. Adelaide told him about her mother, dead from fever when Adelaide was 8. She told him about learning the forge, about the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands, about the fear when her father was injured and she realized everything depended on her. "You did not crack under it, though," Red observed. "The pressure. Some people would have." "I did not have a choice," Adelaide said. "When you are the only one who can do something, you do it, no matter how hard." "That is not true," Red said. "You always have a choice. You could have given up, sold the forge, moved on, but you did not. That takes strength, Adelaide, real strength." After dinner, Red walked her back to the forge, taking the long way through the quiet streets. The Nevada night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "I have been thinking," Red said as they walked. "My knife will be done tomorrow." "It will," Adelaide confirmed, her heart sinking at the reminder that he would be leaving soon. "Thing is, I find myself not wanting to leave just yet. Was wondering if maybe I could find some other work that needs doing. Got any projects that require a strong back and willing hands?" Hope fluttered in Adelaide's chest. "I have a delivery that needs to be made up to a ranch about 20 miles north. 3 dozen horseshoes, too heavy for me to cart on my own. Was going to hire someone with a wagon." "I've got a horse and 2 good arms," Red said. "Could make that delivery for you. Might take 2 days going up and back." "2 days," Adelaide said, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "That seems reasonable." They had reached the forge. Red turned to face her, his large hands gentle as he took hers. He looked down at her calloused palms, running his thumbs over the rough skin. "These hands," he said quietly. "They are the hands of someone who knows who they are, who is not afraid of hard work or hard choices. I have never met anyone quite like you, Adelaide Johnson." "I have never met anyone like you either, Red Jameson," Adelaide said truthfully. "Most men are intimidated by what I do, by these hands you seem to admire." "Then most men are fools," Red said. "Strength recognizes strength, Adelaide, and you are one of the strongest people I have ever met." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made Adelaide's breath catch. Then he released her hands and stepped back. "I will be here tomorrow morning for that delivery," he said, "and to pick up my knife." Adelaide watched him walk away into the darkness, her hands still warm from his touch, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. She went inside to check on her father and found him still awake, reading by lamplight. "Good evening," he asked, setting down his book. "Yes, Papa," Adelaide said. "Very good." Over the next week, Red found reasons to stay in Las Vegas. After the delivery to the northern ranch, there was work to be done repairing the boarding house roof. Then he offered to help one of the local ranchers bring in a herd that had wandered during a storm. Each evening, he came to the forge, and each evening he and Adelaide found time to talk, to share meals, to learn more about each other. Adelaide found herself looking forward to his arrivals with an intensity that surprised her. Red was unlike any man she had ever known. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, admired her strength instead of being threatened by it. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. One evening, as they sat outside the forge watching the sun set over the desert, Red reached over and took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I have been here almost 2 weeks now." That is longer than I have stayed in any town in 5 years. Adelaide's heart sank. You need to get back to the mountains. I do, Red admitted. Winter is coming and I need to prepare. But here is the thing, Adelaide, I do not want to go, or rather, I do not want to go without you. Adelaide turned to face him fully. What are you saying? Red stood, pulling her to her feet, his large hands gentle on hers. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I have lived enough of my life to know what I feel. You are strong and smart and beautiful, and when I am with you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for. Tears pricked at Adelaide's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I think I started loving you the first day you came here, when you looked at my hands and saw strength instead of something to be ashamed of. Red pulled her close, and Adelaide rested her head against his broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. His arms came around her, making her feel protected and cherished and safe. Come with me, Red said softly, up to the mountains. I have a cabin up there, solid and warm. There is space for a small forge if you want one. We could have a life there, Adelaide, a good life. Adelaide pulled back to look up at him. What about my father? I cannot just leave him. I would never ask you to, Red said. If he is well enough to travel, he could come too. If not, we will figure something out. I am not asking you to choose between me and your family. I am asking you to choose a life with me that has room for everyone you love. It was exactly the right thing to say, and Adelaide felt the last of her reservations crumble. She reached up, placing her hand against Red's bearded cheek, and he turned his face to kiss her palm. Yes, she said. Yes, I will come with you, but we need to wait until my father is healed enough to make the journey or until we can find someone trustworthy to look after him. We will wait as long as we need to, Red promised. I have waited this long to find you. I can wait a bit longer to start our life together. He bent his head, and Adelaide rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but it quickly deepened as they both gave in to the feelings they had been holding back. Red's arms tightened around her, and Adelaide felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. They pulled apart eventually, both slightly breathless. Red rested his forehead against hers, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. We should probably talk to your father, he said. Ask his blessing properly. He will give it, Adelaide said with certainty. He wants me to be happy, and you make me happy, Red, happier than I have ever been. They went inside to speak with Thomas, who was sitting up in his bed working on some bookkeeping for the forge. When Adelaide and Red entered hand in hand, a knowing smile spread across his weathered face. Papa, Adelaide said, Red has asked me to marry him, and I have said yes, but only if you give us your blessing. Thomas set aside his papers and looked at Red with the assessing gaze of a father evaluating the man who wanted to marry his daughter. Red met his gaze steadily, not flinching or looking away. You love my daughter? Thomas asked bluntly. With everything I am, Red said. She is the finest woman I have ever met, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it. You will take care of her, keep her safe. I will protect her with my life, Red said, but I will also respect her strength. She does not need a man to save her, Mr. Johnson. She needs a partner who will stand beside her. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his whole face. Then you have my blessing and my gratitude for seeing what so many others missed. My Adelaide is special, always has been. I know, Red said, and I will treasure her accordingly. Thomas insisted they marry properly, with a ceremony and witnesses, so they planned a wedding for 2 weeks hence. It would give Thomas time to heal enough to attend, and give Adelaide time to train someone to help at the forge. Red spent those 2 weeks making himself useful around town. earning money for their future while also proving to the skeptical townsfolk that he was serious about settling down. Adelaide worked on finishing all her outstanding orders and finding a young man named Peter Mills who showed promise as an apprentice. She taught him the basics, showed him how to handle the forge, and Peter proved to be a quick study. With Peter helping and her father on the mend, Adelaide felt comfortable leaving the business in capable hands. The wedding was a simple affair held at the small church at the edge of town. Adelaide wore a new dress, pale yellow like sunshine, that the seamstress had made for her as a gift. Red wore his cleanest buckskins and had trimmed his beard neatly. Martha from the boarding house and several other townspeople attended, along with Peter and some of the local ranchers who had come to respect Adelaide's work. When the preacher asked Red if he took Adelaide as his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong, filling the small church. And when Adelaide said the same words, she meant them with every fiber of her being. They celebrated at the boarding house with a simple meal, and that night Red carried Adelaide across the threshold of the boarding house room he had been renting. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly. "I have never been with a woman before," he admitted. "I wanted to wait until it meant something, until it was with someone I loved." Adelaide felt her heart swell with love for this gentle giant of a man. "Neither have I," she said. "We will figure it out together." And they did, with tenderness and patience and love, discovering each other in the lamplight while the desert night settled around them. The next morning, they began preparations for the journey to Red's mountain cabin. Thomas had improved enough to make the trip, though it would need to be taken slowly. They purchased a sturdy wagon and loaded it with Adelaide's tools, enough supplies for the winter, and Thomas's bed so he could rest during the journey. The trip north into the mountains took 6 days. They traveled through the Nevada desert first, then into the foothills, and finally up into the high country where pine trees grew tall and streams ran clear and cold. Red drove the wagon with Adelaide beside him on the bench, while Thomas rested in the back, growing stronger each day. Adelaide fell in love with the mountains almost as quickly as she had fallen in love with Red. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and sage. Eagles soared overhead, and deer watched them pass with liquid eyes. It was so different from the dusty streets of Las Vegas, so wild and beautiful that it took her breath away. Red's cabin sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by towering peaks. It was larger than Adelaide had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, the single large room was divided into sections: a sleeping area with a real bed, a kitchen with a good iron stove, a sitting area with a fireplace. It was rustic but well made, clearly the work of a man who knew how to live comfortably in the wilderness. "The previous owner died and left it to me," Red explained. "Old trapper named Jacob. He taught me most of what I know about surviving up here. When he passed, he had no family, so he left me his cabin and his trap lines." "It is perfect," Adelaide said, meaning it. She could already see where she would set up a small forge, could imagine the life they would build here together. They spent the next weeks preparing for winter. Red showed Adelaide his trap lines, taught her to read the signs of the forest, to track animals and predict weather. Adelaide set up her forge in a small outbuilding, and though it was smaller than what she was used to, it had everything she needed. Thomas healed steadily in the mountain air. He began helping around the cabin, teaching Adelaide new techniques for metalwork that he had never had time to show her in the busy forge back in Las Vegas. He and Red developed an easy friendship, 2 men who respected each other's strengths. Winter came to the mountains with the first snowfall in late October. Adelaide had never seen so much snow, and she stood outside the cabin watching it fall, her face tilted up to the sky, while Red stood behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist. "Beautiful, is it not?" he murmured into her hair. "Everything here is beautiful," Adelaide said, leaning back against him. "I never knew life could be this good." They settled into a comfortable routine. Red trapped and hunted, keeping them supplied with meat and furs. Adelaide worked in her forge, creating tools and items they needed, and occasionally crafting decorative pieces just for the joy of it. Thomas cooked and kept the cabin tidy. His leg finally healed enough that he moved around with only a slight limp. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, and Red taught Adelaide to read the stars to understand the patterns of the wilderness. She taught him the finer points of metalwork, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, watching the flames dance. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late November that Adelaide realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Red one night when they were alone in bed. "I think I am with child," she whispered in the darkness. She felt Red go very still beside her, then he pulled her close, his large hand splaying across her still flat stomach. "Truly." His voice was thick with emotion. "I think so. It is early yet, but all the signs are there." Red buried his face in her hair, and she felt wetness on her neck. He was crying, she realized. This strong mountain man was crying with joy. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this gift, for choosing me, for building this life with me." Adelaide turned in his arms to face him, wiping the tears from his weathered cheeks. "Thank you for seeing me, Red. For loving my strength instead of fearing it. For giving me a life I never even dreamed was possible." They made love then, slow and tender, celebrating the new life they had created together. Winter deepened, and Adelaide's pregnancy progressed. By midwinter, her condition was obvious, and Thomas fussed over her like she was made of glass, much to her amusement. "Papa, I am pregnant, not broken," she said one morning when he tried to stop her from working at the forge. "Let an old man worry," Thomas said. "You are my only daughter, and this will be my first grandchild." Adelaide relented, accepting his care with good grace. Red was equally protective but better at hiding it, though she often caught him watching her with an expression of wonder on his face. Spring came to the mountains in a rush of meltwater and budding trees. Adelaide's stomach had grown large, and she moved with the careful grace of a woman in her final months of pregnancy. She had to give up working the forge, much as it frustrated her, and instead spent her time preparing for the baby's arrival. Red rode down to the nearest town, a 3-day journey, to fetch a midwife to stay with them for the final weeks. The woman, a capable grandmother named Sarah, arrived and immediately took charge of the final preparations. Adelaide went into labor on a warm June evening, just as the sun was setting over the mountains. Red paced outside while Sarah and Thomas attended Adelaide. The labor was long and difficult, but when morning broke and a baby's cry filled the cabin, Red burst through the door to find Adelaide exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. "A son," she said. "We have a son, Red." Red approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. He looked down at the tiny red face, at the small fists waving in the air, and Adelaide saw the exact moment he fell completely in love with their child. "He is perfect," Red said, his voice rough. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names during the long winter months. "What about Thomas, after my father?" Adelaide suggested. Red looked over at Thomas, who stood in the corner with tears streaming down his face. "Thomas Jameson," Red said. "It has a good sound to it." "Thank you," Thomas Sr. said, his voice breaking. "I would be honored." Baby Thomas was a healthy child with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He grew quickly, thriving on Adelaide's milk and the clean mountain air. Red proved to be a devoted father, carrying the baby in a sling against his broad chest while he did his chores, talking to him constantly, though the baby could not yet understand the words. Adelaide recovered her strength slowly, and by late summer she was back at her forge, working on small projects while Thomas Jr. napped nearby in a cradle Red had carved. She found she could balance motherhood and her craft, and Red never questioned her need to create, to work with her hands. That first year passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion and love. They celebrated Thomas Jr.'s first birthday with a small cake that Thomas Sr. baked, watching as the baby smashed his chubby hands into the frosting and laughed with delight. "I have been thinking," Red said that evening after they had put the baby to bed, "about maybe building an addition to the cabin, more room for our growing family." "Are you hoping for more children, Mr. Jameson?" Adelaide asked with a smile. "If we are blessed with more, I would welcome them," Red said. "But I was also thinking about your father. He deserves his own room, some privacy." Adelaide kissed him, this thoughtful man who always considered everyone's needs. "That is a wonderful idea." They built the addition that fall, with Thomas Sr. helping where he could. 2 new rooms, one for Thomas Sr. and one that would serve as a nursery when more children came. More children did come. A daughter they named Rose was born 2 years after Thomas, with her mother's dark hair and her father's strong build. Then another son, James, born 3 years after Rose. The cabin filled with the sounds of children playing, of Adelaide's hammer ringing from the forge, of Red's deep laughter echoing through the rooms. Adelaide never stopped working her forge, though she balanced it carefully with motherhood. She created beautiful and practical items, knives and tools for Red, decorative pieces for the cabin, toys for the children. Her hands remained calloused and strong, and Red never stopped admiring them, often taking them in his own and kissing them tenderly. Thomas Sr. lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren, living contentedly in his room, helping Adelaide with her forge work and teaching the children to read and write. He passed peacefully in his sleep when Thomas Jr. was 8, Rose was 6, and James was 3. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the valley, with a marker Adelaide forged herself, decorated with intricate scrollwork. "He had a good ending," Red said as they stood over the grave. "Surrounded by family, knowing he was loved, we should all be so fortunate." Adelaide leaned against her husband, watching her children play nearby. "He taught me everything important," she said. "How to work with my hands, how to be strong, how to love without reservation. I will miss him." "We all will," Red said, pulling her close. "But his legacy lives on in you, in our children, in the work you do. That matters." The years continued to pass, measured in the growth of their children and the changing of the seasons. Thomas Jr. grew tall and strong like his father, showing an interest in hunting and trapping. Rose was adventurous and clever, equally comfortable helping her mother at the forge or riding through the mountains with her father. James was the quiet one, thoughtful and artistic, who loved to draw the animals and landscapes around their home. Adelaide and Red grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still made time for each other, still sat together by the fire on winter evenings, still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt that first day at the forge. When Thomas Jr. turned 18, he announced his intention to seek his fortune down in the growing cities of California. Adelaide felt her heart break a little, but Red reminded her that young men needed to find their own way. "He will come back," Red said. "The mountains get in your blood. He will wander for a while, but he will come back." Red was right. Thomas returned 2 years later with a bride, a smart young woman from San Francisco who fell in love with the mountain life as quickly as she had fallen in love with Thomas. They built their own cabin nearby, and soon Adelaide and Red were grandparents themselves. Rose never married, instead becoming a skilled trapper and hunter who worked alongside her father. She was happy with her choice, living free and independent, and Adelaide supported her completely, understanding better than most the value of choosing your own path. James eventually moved to Santa Fe, where he became a successful artist, painting landscapes of the mountains he had grown up in. He visited regularly, bringing his wife and eventually his children, filling the cabin once again with the sound of young voices. Adelaide and Red grew old together, their hair turning white, their faces weathering like the mountains around them. Adelaide's hands remained strong, though arthritis eventually forced her to give up the heaviest forge work. Red's back grew stiff from years of hard living, but he could still outwork men half his age. On a summer evening when they were both in their 70s, they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, supervised by Rose, while the sounds of dinner being prepared drifted from inside where Thomas Jr.'s wife was cooking. "You ever regret it?" Red asked, taking Adelaide's calloused hand in his own weathered one. "Leaving the forge in Las Vegas, coming up here with me?" Adelaide looked at him, at this man who had seen her strength and loved her for it, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. She thought of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of the thousands of sunsets they had watched together, of the love that had sustained them through hard winters and difficult times. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A life of purpose and love and joy. What more could anyone ask for?" Red lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles as he had done so many times over the years. "The hands of strength," he murmured. "My blacksmith's girl with calloused palms. I loved you the moment I saw these hands, and I love you still." "And I love you," Adelaide said. "My mountain man, my partner, my everything." They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, their hands clasped, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created. The forge in the small outbuilding sat cold now, but the tools Adelaide had made over the years were used daily by her children and grandchildren. Her legacy was not just in the metal she had shaped, but in the lives she had touched, the strength she had passed on, the love she had shared. When Adelaide passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, Red held her hand one last time, tears streaming down his weathered face. She had been the other half of his soul, his partner in every way that mattered. He lived 2 more years without her, cared for lovingly by Rose and visited regularly by all their children and grandchildren. When Red finally followed Adelaide, they buried him beside her on the hillside next to Thomas Sr., with a view of the valley they had called home. Thomas Jr. forged markers for both his parents, decorated with Adelaide's distinctive scrollwork that he had learned from her. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through the generations. And every person who lived there, who worked the small forge or trapped the surrounding mountains, knew the story of Adelaide and Red, the blacksmith's girl with calloused palms who had hands of strength, and the mountain man who loved her for exactly who she was. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that true love recognizes and honors strength, that the best partnerships are built on mutual respect and admiration, that choosing your own path and standing firm in who you are will eventually lead you to the person meant to stand beside you. And in the small forge that still stood beside the cabin, Adelaide's tools remained, kept sharp and ready, a testament to a woman who knew her own worth, who worked with strong hands and loved with her whole heart, who built a legacy that would outlast any piece of metal she ever shaped. The mountains stood eternal around the valley, keeping watch over the family that had been born from the love between a blacksmith and a mountain man, their story woven into the very fabric of the wild and beautiful land they had called home.